Here's a question for you. If Volkswagen are the ones that made the diesel-powered car go mainstream worldwide, why is it that they're also the ones who are trying to get rid of diesel cars the quickest from their lineup? Well, in order to explain that, we have to look at the history of Volkswagen's TDIs. Unlike gasoline engines, diesels use sheer compressive force to ignite the fuel instead of spark plugs. That means diesels have much higher compression ratios and air-fuel ratios. That, in turn, gives them among the highest thermal efficiency of any internal combustion engines, including F1 cars. Diesels can be up to 55% efficient, and a higher thermal efficiency means less energy is wasted and the engine itself is more fuel efficient and generates more torque. Now, the first car to use diesel power was the Citroën Rosalie in 1933, and after World War II their popularity increased exponentially. Volkswagen made the Golf diesel in 1973 in response to the oil crisis. Mercedes ramped it up with the 300SD luxury sedan and their C111-3, which reached 200 miles an hour at the Nürburgring. Even Fiat was getting the direct-injected turbo diesel-powered Chroma sedan. Volkswagen was falling behind and needed an advantage. So, in 1989, the first turbocharged direct-injected diesels were put into Audi 100s. Performance-wise, by today's standards, the TDIs were terrible, making just 115 horsepower. But you don't buy a diesel purely for speed. The TDI lowered fuel consumption by 5% while increasing power and torque compared to the base model gasoline engine. Unfortunately, this was overshadowed by the unintended acceleration lawsuits that plagued the Audi 100/5000. Now, for the record, there wasn't actually any unintended acceleration. Customers just pressed the wrong pedal, but a fraudulent 60 Minutes report put blame on Audi's transmission, and Audi nearly lost the US market forever. But apart from that hiccup, Volkswagen didn't give up. The 1.9-liter four-cylinder version of the TDI was installed in the Golf, the Jetta, and the Passat. These three vehicles and their successes in Europe boosted diesel sales to heights America would never see. By 2007, 50% of all new cars sold in Europe were diesels. In fact, Volkswagen's 1999 1.4-liter TDI won the International Engine of the Year award for fuel economy. And also in 1999, the Audi A8 got a brand new direct injection system called Common Rail in its new engine, a 3.3-liter V8 making 228 horsepower. By 2003, that was a 4.1-liter V8 making 322 horsepower and 480 foot-pounds of torque, giving this diesel sedan a 0 to 60 of 5.9 seconds and a limited top speed of 155 miles an hour. In 2003, the only car faster in Audi's lineup was the V10-powered S8. Meanwhile, the new Volkswagen Touareg SUV needed a new engine that provided a lot of torque to move its 5,800-pound weight. Now, they made a few different versions, and the 6-liter W12 got all the glory, but it was actually the diesels that achieved higher torque figures. Now, these included the 2.5-liter inline-5 making 300 torque, the 3-liter V6 making 370 torque, and the big one, the 5-liter 40-valve V10 making 310 horsepower and 550 torque. That meant the nearly 3-ton SUV could reach 60 in 7.8 seconds. And the brilliant thing about these diesels is that, provided you manage the turbos properly, it is easy to throw in tons of extra power without damaging the engine. They are designed to withstand incredibly high compression ratios after all. The Touareg's V10 was a true game changer, but Audi wanted to dream bigger, and in 2009, their Q7 SUV entered the history books. Audi added 2 more cylinders to the Touareg's V10 to create a twin-turbocharged 6-liter V12, making 500 horsepower and a staggering 740 foot-pounds of torque. Not only does that make the Q7 TDI the torquiest SUV ever built, but it's also the most powerful production diesel ever made. This several-ton SUV did 0 to 60 in just 5.5 seconds, and Audi says without the limiter, it would cruise to 171 miles an hour. And the diesel engine is just the icing on the already fantastic cake. The 16.5-inch carbon ceramic brakes were up front with 14.8s in the back, along with a flexible all-wheel drive power distribution and dynamic air suspension. This was an advanced car. And that advancement meant that the 5,700-pound SUV can lap the Nürburgring in 8 minutes and 50 seconds. I don't like SUVs, as you will probably know if you're familiar with this channel. But the TDI V12 Q7 is an absolute underappreciated legend. Sadly, it was also a discontinued legend in the US because of California emission laws, and it was replaced with the much less cool V6 TDI. But apart from the US, all of Volkswagen's diesels were doing really well. The Mark V Golf started experimenting with hybridized diesels, and the 2014 Audi A8 had a turbocharged 4.2-liter V8 making 380 horsepower and over 600 torque. The A8 was a sub-5-second 0 to 60, and the only diesels that could compete with that were from BMW's tuning shop Alpine. These were genuinely quick cars, thanks to a little help from Le Mans. See, diesels have been racing since Cummins drove their diesel-powered Indy car at the 1931 Indy 500 without stopping for fuel. And BMW proved that diesels could win top-tier racing classes when one of their 320D touring cars won 1998 24 Hours of Nürburgring outright. But diesels had never been successful at Le Mans. That is until Audi arrived on the scene. At this point in our story, Audi had won Le Mans 5 times in the first 6 years of the 21st century, and the R10 TDI was built to show off Volkswagen's new diesel technology and to replace the R8, which was being destroyed by balance of performance rules. The engine was a bit of a masterpiece, a 5.5-liter twin-turbocharged V12 making 700 horsepower and 940 torque at up to 200 bar of boost. Now, I know not many people are familiar with the bar unit. However, if you look up the conversion rates on the internet, you will see that 200 bar of boost is 2,900 psi. Most supercars run between 10 and 20 psi of boost. That's a lot of pressure per cylinder. That makes it powerful. And the diesel efficiency makes it better for the long endurance stints. But other teams still had their doubts, as it was overweight due to the larger chassis to fit the heavier engine. So it won on its debut at the 2006 12 Hours of Sebring, and followed that up by destroying its LMP1 rival by 4 laps at the 24 Hours of Le Mans that same year, and repeated both of those feats in 2007, even setting the outright speed record for the current Le Mans layout at 220 miles an hour in practice with the chicanes on the Mulsanne Straight. But times were beginning to change in France as Peugeot showed up with their own diesel LMP, the 908. Peugeot was up to 3.5 seconds per lap faster than Audi in 2007, but consistency and skilled wet weather driving won the day for Audi. But Peugeot wouldn't forget that and ended Audi's 5-year streak by snatching a 1-2 finish in 2009 as Audi's new R15 TDI struggled with mechanical problems. Audi didn't like that at all and reworked the R15 into the R15 Plus in 2010. It had new aerodynamics, lower fenders, a new fuel tank, and 600 horsepower. This forced Peugeot to overwork the 908 to keep ahead of Audi, and they experienced several mechanical failures. Not only did this allow Audi to win, it allowed them to cover 5,410.7 kilometers, finally breaking the Porsche 917's distance record from 1971. But the R15 only lasted 2 years as closed cockpit regulations meant the development of the R18 began. This was limited per rules to a 3.7-liter V6 making just 532 horsepower. Despite this and several violent accidents, the lone surviving R18 won Audi's 11th Le Mans by the slimmest of margins. Audi and Peugeot battled it out for 24 hours straight, and Audi beat the 908 by just 13.9 seconds. But 2012 signaled a big change. The R18 E-Tron Quattro was an all-wheel drive hybrid version, and again it won Le Mans. In 2012, 2013, and 2014, Toyota had the pace in 2014, winning 5 races that season, but their typical Le Mans luck plagued them, so they weren't really a problem. No, that honor was reserved for their big brother Porsche arriving. Their new 919 had a gasoline V4 and a hybrid system, and given that almost every Porsche prototype dating back to 1970 has won Le Mans at least once, Audi lost every single year until they withdrew in 2016. But even still, the TDI engine lineup was at the top of the world in 2016. TDIs had won Le Mans 8 times, the Dakar 3 times, and were selling better than ever thanks to various awards including Green Car of the Year in 2009 and 2010. But if we follow the typical film act structure, we have hit the peak, and now conflict must ensue. For context, diesels can be 20 times worse for the environment than a normal internal combustion powered car, without solutions like scrubbers or traps. Those, of course, choke the engine's efficiency, and that makes balancing the car's performance and its emissions exponentially more important for diesels than any other car. But the strange thing is, emissions testing is not universal between the US and the EU. The US, the EU, and California all have specific requirements and testing procedures that are different from one another. And back in 2013, a group of research engineers at the European Commission's Joint Research Center found it was possible for vehicles to detect when an emissions test was being conducted based on safety and reliability exemptions in the testing environment. Now that we have that context, let's fast forward a year to the International Council on Clean Transportation, when they sourced 15 cars and actually measured their emissions on the road, not in the laboratory, just to show how good European diesels had become, a little bit of a pat on the back. They found the exact opposite. Their Jetta and their Passat both registered emissions 7 times higher than regulations allowed. That sounded so high it was ridiculous. So another group of scientists, this time from the University of West Virginia, tried to replicate their experiment here in the US. And just like the European Union's test, both Volkswagens passed California emissions tests perfectly, and then again, they both failed horrifically in the real world. The Passat emitted 5 to 20 times more than was allowed, while the Jetta was up to 35 times worse than US emission limits. It took a few months to figure out how Volkswagen did it, but when regulators did solve the mystery, Volkswagen would weep. What they did was add an acoustics condition in their engine management software that, as soon as it noticed a vehicle was undergoing testing conditions, would remap the engine to minimize emissions just for that test. That way Volkswagen could claim the performance figures in the real world and the emissions figures in the testing world. They did a shoddy attempt at damage control, claiming a simple technical glitch, but by August of 2015 they quite literally came clean. The Volkswagen Group's higher management saw several restructurings due to resignation and felony prosecutions and convictions for fraud, conspiracy, and stock market manipulation. Over 11 million cars were affected across Volkswagen, Porsche, Audi, Skoda, and Seat. Their stock fell over 40%, and it wouldn't fully recover that value until 2021. And with the price to fix or replace more cars than the entire population of Sweden, it was going to cost them a lot more than their stock devaluation. See, Volkswagen may not have been the only manufacturer to cheat, far from it, but they were by far the biggest abuser, and international governing bodies ravaged them unmercifully. A March 2020 Volkswagen meeting reported that Dieselgate had cost them nearly $35 billion, and it's not even over yet. As recently as May of this year, the British High Court fined Volkswagen $228 million for defeat devices. One thing that does seem to be over, though, is the diesel car industry. With climate change concerns, stricter emission laws, and a shattered confidence, diesel sales fell by an average of 17% in Europe by the end of the decade. In 2021, they controlled 28% of the new car market, with full EVs trailing behind at just 27%. That said, sales did kind of increase in 2020 and 2021, although that does seem to be a short-term reprieve. Volkswagen still sells the TDIs, although the whole company has rotated towards their new strategy 2025. It's an electrification initiative that aims to spend over $48 billion on EVs and plug-in hybrids, and it is a program that has already produced the XL1, the most efficient production car ever built, that can get 310 mpg, for realsies this time. And it's also led to their ID lineup, which includes the ID 3 through 6 family cars, the ID Buzz van, the ID Life SUV, and on the more fun side, the ID.R hill climb car that shattered records at Goodwood, Pikes Peak, and the Nürburgring. All of this is to say that diesels are likely becoming less and less viable over the coming years, and nobody has a better reason to ditch them than Volkswagen.